They mocked her gray sweater. They laughed at her simple bun. But tonight, at Caroline's glittering dinner party, they were about to realize. The woman they dismissed just sold her company for $750 million, and their faces. Absolutely priceless. Ruth Harper adjusted the strap of her simple black handbag as she stood outside Caroline's grand home. The sprawling mansion loomed before her, its tall windows glowing softly in the evening light. From inside, she could already hear the muffled sounds of laughter and clinking glasses. She took a deep breath. "You don't belong here," a small voice whispered in the back of her mind. But she silenced it, stepping forward onto the polished marble porch. A uniformed butler opened the massive double doors with a rehearsed smile. "Good evening, ma'am. Welcome to Mims's, Caroline Whitmore's residence." Ruth smiled politely, handing him the invitation. "Thank you. Where do you want?" Inside, the entryway was like a scene from a luxury magazine. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. A sweeping staircase curved gracefully along the wall. Fresh lilies filled glass vases taller than her waist. Every detail screamed elegance and exclusivity. She ran a nervous hand over the sleeve of her gray cashmere sweater. It wasn't flashy, but it was comfortable. She'd chosen it because it felt like her. But now, standing among such opulence, it felt underdressed. "Mr. Whitmore will be down shortly," the butler said. "Please, make yourself comfortable." Ruth nodded and moved cautiously toward the sound of voices coming from the formal dining room. As she stepped inside, a wave of silence washed over the group of women already seated around the long mahogany table. 7 pairs of perfectly manicured eyes turned toward her, scanning her outfit, her hair, her quiet demeanor. A blonde woman wearing a pearl choker was the first to speak. "Oh, you must be Caroline's college friend." Her voice was warm, but her smile was tight. "Yes," Ruth answered, offering a small nod. "I'm Ruth Harper. How lovely." Another woman, Victoria, tilted her head, her designer earrings catching the light. "We've heard so much about you." Ruth doubted that. "Please, join us." Victoria gestured toward an empty seat at the table. "We were just talking about our summer homes. Do you have one?" Irresolute. The question caught Ruth off guard. I have a small cabin by a lake." Victoria's eyebrows lifted slightly. "How quaint." She exchanged a subtle glance with Diane, the woman seated beside her. As Ruth sat down, she felt the weight of unspoken judgment settle over her like an invisible cloak. The women resumed their conversation, weaving stories of European vacations, designer renovations, and 6-figure charity galas. Ruth listened quietly, sipping from the champagne glass a server placed before her. She wasn't here to compete. She wasn't here to impress. She was here because Caroline had insisted. "And what do you do?" Ruth Victoria finally asked, her tone dripping with polite curiosity. "I'm in furniture design," Ruth replied simply. Victoria's lips curled slightly. "And furniture, how interesting." Bethany, seated across from her, leaned forward. "Like my home decor, I design and manufacture custom pieces," Ruth clarified, keeping her tone even. "Ah," Victoria said, her smile never reaching her eyes. "A creative soul. That must be, fulfilling." "Yes," Ruth agreed softly. "It is The conversation drifted again, leaving Ruth on the periphery. She didn't mind. She'd been underestimated before, judged by appearances, laughed at for her simplicity. What they didn't know, what none of them realized, was that beneath her modest sweater and unassuming demeanor was the founder of a company valued at nearly $1 billion. Tonight, their assumptions would be their undoing. And Ruth, she was content to let them dig their own grave of arrogance. For now, the dinner progressed like a carefully choreographed play. Servers glided between chairs, placing porcelain plates adorned with delicate appetizers before each guest. Ruth quietly admired the craftsmanship of the tableware, the subtle patterns etched into the fine china. Everything here had been curated to perfection. Yet beneath the polished surface, cracks showed. So, Ruth, Victoria began again, swirling her glass of Chardonnay. Furniture design, do you have a little boutique somewhere? Ruth took a sip of water before answering. No, I work with a team of artisans. We produce limited collections. Victoria's eyebrows arched in mock surprise. Oh, so more like Etsy. A ripple of laughter fluttered around the table. No, Ruth replied calmly. Not quite. I love supporting small businesses. Diane chimed in, her diamond bracelet sparkling under the chandelier. It's so important to help local makers. Ruth offered a polite smile. It's true. Supporting craftsmanship matters. But it must be difficult, Victoria pressed, leaning forward as if delivering wisdom, trying to compete with mass production. I mean, how do you even survive in that market? Bethany giggled. Maybe she sells at farmers markets. That's charming. Ruth set down her glass gently. Actually, we've been fortunate. Our collections are in demand. Really, Victoria's voice held that sing-song disbelief of someone convinced they already knew the answer. How niche. Diane glanced at Victoria, then back at Ruth. Do you ever show at trade fairs, or is it more local craft shows? The undercurrent was clear. Every question is a veiled barb. Every smile was tinged with condescension. Ruth's gaze drifted to the large console table against the far wall. Elegant, understated, familiar, not a rewritten one, sir. I believe that's one of mine, she said softly. Victoria followed her gaze, frowning. What do you mean? The table, Ruth gestured. That's from my Meridian collection. Silence. For a brief moment, the table of women froze, eyes darting between Ruth and the console. That Victoria's voice cracked slightly. You designed that table. Yes, Ruth confirmed. It's one of our earlier pieces. Victoria's lips parted, words failing her for once. I thought that was from Italy, Bethany stammered. It's manufactured in Italy, Ruth explained gently. But the design originated in our studio. A beat passed, then another. The women exchanged glances, recalibrating, reassessing. But Victoria recovered quickly, plastering a smile back on. Well, I had no idea. I guess furniture design is bigger than I thought. It can be, Ruth replied, her tone neutral. Diane leaned in. Do you have any celebrity clients? Ruth hesitated. A few wayered me you weren't. Anyone we'd know, Victoria probed eagerly. Ruth smiled faintly. Perhaps, their curiosity burned hotter now, their earlier mockery softening into intrigue. But Ruth wasn't about to hand them names, validation, or stories to brag about at their next gala. Caroline didn't tell us much about you, Victoria remarked, her tone more cautious now. She just said you were in furniture. I suppose that's accurate, Ruth said. I like keeping things simple. The table fell into thoughtful silence. Victoria sipped her wine, studying Ruth like a puzzle missing pieces. And Ruth, she simply smiled inwardly. Let them wonder. Let them stew in their assumptions. The night wasn't over, and neither was the revelation. The conversation shifted as dessert was served, delicate lemon soufflés arriving in individual ramekins. The women leaned back in their chairs, savoring the sweetness, their earlier jabs forgotten or perhaps momentarily set aside. Victoria, however, wasn't done. So, Ruth, she purred, stirring her coffee with slow, deliberate circles. Do you have plans to expand your little business, or are you content staying boutique? Ruth's lips curved into a small smile. I'm not looking to expand right now. I just sold it. Victoria's spoon clinked against her cup. You sold it? Yes, Nilwas Teturatin. Ruth took a sip of water. 6 months ago. For how much? If you don't mind me asking, Diane asked, leaning forward, her curiosity no longer masked. Ruth hesitated, then answered simply. $750 million. Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. Bethany's fork paused midair. Margaret's eyes widened. Victoria's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "I'm sorry," Victoria stammered. "Did you just say $750 million? Technically, 752, Ruth corrected gently. But who's counting? The stunned quiet enveloped the table. The same women who had mocked her sweater, her understated demeanor, now sat frozen, their minds scrambling to reconcile the woman before them with the figure she'd just named. Caroline, returning from checking on the caterer, walked into the room and paused, sensing the shift in energy. "Did I miss something?" Victoria turned to her, still visibly shaken. "Caroline, did you know about Ruth?" Caroline raised an eyebrow. "Know what? About the sale, her company? She sold it for—" "Oh," Caroline smiled knowingly. "Of course. Harper Designs. Ruth's brilliant. I assumed you all knew." Bethany's jaw dropped. "Harper Designs, the Harper Designs." Caroline chuckled. "Yes. Ruth founded it. Built it from scratch. Her work is in museums. You've probably sat on one of her pieces without realizing." Victoria looked as though the ground had shifted beneath her. "But you never said—" "I didn't think it was relevant," Ruth replied calmly. "I was invited as Caroline's friend." The women exchanged embarrassed glances. Suddenly, their designer dresses, diamond bracelets, and status symbols felt performative. Victoria started, then faltered. "I didn't expect—" "That's the thing about expectations," Ruth said softly. "They're often built on assumptions." Diane's voice cracked through the silence. I had no idea." Ruth offered a kind smile. "Most people don't." Caroline stepped beside Ruth, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You've always stayed true to yourself, Ruth. That's why I admire you." Victoria lifted her champagne glass with a shaky smile. "Well, a toast, then, to Ruth, Benisso, and her success." The others hastily raised their glasses. But Ruth didn't. Instead, she looked around the table, her gaze steady, her words deliberate. "Success isn't measured in numbers," she said quietly. "It's measured in what you create, what you give, and who you become." Her words hung in the air, gentle yet profound. And for the first time all evening, the room felt humbled. As the clink of glasses faded, the dining room settled into an uneasy quiet. The women, once brimming with confident chatter, now eyed Ruth with a strange mix of admiration, regret, and lingering disbelief. Victoria cleared her throat, her tone softer, less clipped. "Ruth, I hope you know we were only teasing earlier. We didn't mean anything by it." Ruth tilted her head, her gaze steady. "Of course," she replied calmly. "You were just having fun." But there was weight behind her words, a quiet acknowledgement that fun often comes at someone else's expense. Diane leaned forward, resting her manicured hands on the table. "Truly, Ruth, I had no idea you were that Ruth Harper. I mean, Harper Designs is legendary. My husband's firm uses your pieces for every luxury project." Bethany chimed in eagerly. "I had a Harper coffee table in my last house. I sold it for almost double what I paid. It's practically an investment piece." Ruth smiled politely. "I'm glad you enjoyed it." Margaret's voice trembled slightly. "You've really built something remarkable." Across the table, Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line. She wasn't used to being outshone in her own circles. But she forced a gracious smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's impressive, truly. But tell me, Ruth, why didn't you ever share this? Why keep it quiet tonight?" Ruth set her fork down gently. "Because I didn't come here to impress anyone. I came because Caroline invited me." She paused, letting her words sink in. "And because I've learned, people show their truest selves when they think you have nothing to offer them." A ripple of discomfort passed through the women. Caroline watched quietly, her expression unreadable. Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it again. For once, She had no snide remark ready. I suppose we've all been a bit presumptuous, Diane admitted, swirling her wine. Perhaps we misjudged. Perhaps, Ruth agreed, her voice even. Caroline leaned closer. You've always been like this, Ruth. Humble, thoughtful. It's why I admired you in college. Why I still do. Ruth's lips quirked into a softer smile. You've always seen me, Caroline, even when others didn't. Victoria straightened in her chair. Well, I certainly see you now. She forced a light laugh. We all do, en main voiture. But Ruth sensed the shift beneath Victoria's words, a scrambling, a recalibration. Not genuine understanding, but a repositioning. Bethany cleared her throat. I'd love to pick your brains sometime. Ruth, I'm thinking of redoing my summer home. Perhaps you could recommend some of your pieces. Ruth's smile didn't waver. I'd be happy to. Actually, Victoria cut in quickly. I've been meaning to refresh my guest house. Maybe we could schedule a consultation. Diane nodded enthusiastically. And my husband's company is developing a new luxury condo. He's always looking for high-end partnerships. Suddenly, the same women who had dismissed Ruth mere hours ago were scrambling to attach themselves to her success. Ruth glanced at Caroline, a knowing glint in her eyes. Caroline raised an eyebrow in quiet amusement. I appreciate the interest, Ruth said diplomatically. But tonight, let's just enjoy dinner. No business. The woman hesitated, then reluctantly nodded. But Ruth knew. Their minds were already spinning, recalculating, strategizing. As coffee was served, Victoria leaned over once more, her voice low but urgent. Truly, Ruth, we were wrong about you. Ruth turned, meeting her gaze directly. No, Victoria. You were right. Victoria blinked, confused. I don't understand. You were right about me, Ruth continued softly. You just didn't see the whole picture. And with that, Ruth leaned back, letting the warmth of the coffee cup settle in her hands, watching as the carefully curated world around her slowly, awkwardly adjusted to the presence of someone they had underestimated. As the evening wore on, the energy in the room shifted. The laughter was still there, but softer now, tinged with an edge of uncertainty. The women who had once dismissed Ruth now hung on her every word, their curiosity thinly veiled beneath compliments and flattery. Caroline poured herself another glass of wine, watching it all unfold with quiet amusement. It's funny, she said aloud, how the tables turn. Ruth glanced at her old friend, a small smile playing at her lips. Not so funny when you're the one they turn on, she replied wryly. Victoria perched herself on the arm of a nearby chair, leaning toward Ruth. I've been thinking, she began, her tone unusually earnest. Perhaps you'd consider partnering with our foundation's interior design initiative. We aim to promote women entrepreneurs, and with your background, Ruth held up a hand gently. I appreciate the offer. Victoria, truly, but my focus is elsewhere these days. Victoria's face faltered for a moment before slipping back into its polished smile. Of course. Well, if you ever change your mind, Bethany chimed in eagerly. Do you do private commissions? Ruth, I'd love a custom dining set for my place in the Hamptons. I do fewer commissions now, Ruth replied thoughtfully. But I still make exceptions, when the project feels meaningful. The implication wasn't lost on Bethany, who blinked uncertainly before nodding. Of course. Meaningful. Across the room, Diane whispered to Margaret, both of them stealing glances at Ruth's unassuming figure. They weren't sure what to make of her, a woman who had more wealth and influence than they'd imagined, yet wore it so lightly. Caroline settled beside Ruth again, lowering her voice. Son, I meant what I said earlier. I've always admired you. You stayed true to yourself. Ruth's smile deepened. It wasn't always easy, but authenticity has a way of weeding out the noise. Victoria, not wanting to be left out, pressed forward again. You know, Ruth, I think it's wonderful how you've stayed so grounded despite your success. Most people would have let it go to their head. Ruth turned to her, her expression serene. Maybe it's because I never chased success for its own sake. I just loved what I did. The rest followed. Victoria's gaze flickered, as though searching for a way back into control. Well, I've always believed success reveals character. Yes, Ruth agreed quietly. It does. There was an unmistakable pause as those words settled over the table. At that moment, a server entered the room, carrying a small velvet box. Miss Harper, he announced, holding it out. A courier dropped this off for you. The women watched with barely concealed curiosity as Ruth accepted the box and opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note and a delicate, intricately carved wooden pendant. Caroline peeked over her shoulder. What's that, Tedesarutimamin? A gift, Ruth murmured, smiling softly at the signature. From one of the apprentices in my foundation. She made it herself. Victoria leaned closer, eyeing the pendant skeptically. It's charming, she offered half-heartedly. Ruth held it up, letting the pendant catch the light. It's more than that. It's a symbol, a reminder that craftsmanship, skill, and heart can come from places most people overlook. Caroline's eyes glistened. That's beautiful. Ruth. Bethany frowned slightly. You really care about mentoring, investing in artisans? I do, Ruth replied simply. Because someone once gave me a chance when no one else did. I promised myself I'd do the same. Victoria's voice was almost defensive. But with your resources, you could live anywhere. Do anything? Why? This. Ruth met her gaze without flinching. Because impact matters more than indulgence. Because I want to build something that lasts beyond me. The room fell silent again, a contemplative hush settling over the group. Caroline raised her glass. To Ruth, Menish, for reminding us what true legacy looks like. This time, the toast was genuine. The clink of glasses rang softer, more sincere. And as Ruth sipped her wine, she realized something. She hadn't just changed the tone of the evening. She had changed the room. As the evening approached its final act, the once vibrant conversation had mellowed into thoughtful murmurs. The women no longer spoke over each other in their race to outshine. Instead, they listened carefully, their eyes lingering on Ruth with a mixture of admiration, envy, and reflection. Victoria stood by the grand piano, swirling her wine thoughtfully. I must admit, Ruth, she began, her voice quieter than usual. You've surprised me tonight. Ruth glanced up from her seat, her expression calm but curious. How so? Victoria hesitated, then let out a soft, self-deprecating laugh. I thought I knew how to read people. We all did. She gestured vaguely to the others. But you walked in here, so unassuming. I thought you were, she caught herself, then smiled wryly. Well, less. That's the danger of assumptions, Ruth said gently. They make us blind to what doesn't fit the picture we expect. Diane approached, arms crossed loosely, her diamond bracelet glinting under the chandelier. You know what's funny, she mused. You haven't once bragged about your success. Not even when we practically pushed you to. Ruth chuckled softly. I've never needed to. If you're truly proud of your journey, you don't have to shout it. Bethany settled onto the arm of a velvet chair beside Caroline. It makes me wonder, she said thoughtfully, how many times I've dismissed someone just because they didn't look the part. Caroline's lips curved in a knowing smile. A lot more than we'd care to admit. The room fell quiet again, each woman lost in her own realization. Victoria drained the last of her wine and set the glass down with a decisive click. You've got me thinking, Ruth, about legacy, about what actually matters. Her gaze softened, the sharpness dulled. I've spent so much time trying to keep up appearances, trying to be admired. Ruth met her gaze evenly. Admiration fades. Impact endures. Victoria's smile was faint but real. It's humbling. Being reminded that all this, she gestured to the chandeliers. The designer dresses, the opulence surrounding them doesn't define us. No, Ruth agreed quietly. It doesn't deter you. A knock at the door interrupted them. Caroline's butler entered with an envelope. "Miss Harper, this arrived for you by courier." Ruth accepted it, opening the envelope to reveal a formal letter embossed with an official seal. She skimmed the contents, her brow lifting in mild surprise. Caroline leaned in. "Good news." Ruth folded the letter with care. "The grant I proposed for artisan apprenticeships just got approved. Full funding." Caroline beamed. "That's incredible." Ruth. Victoria looked genuinely impressed. "You're funding a school." "More than a school," Ruth explained. "A place where craftspeople can learn, grow, and pass their skills down. A place where talent isn't limited by background or money." Bethany shook her head in quiet awe. "That's beautiful." Victoria stepped closer, sincerity in her voice. "You're building something that matters. I envy that. You could do the same," Ruth said softly. "It's never too late to build something meaningful." Victoria's eyes glistened for a brief moment before she nodded, swallowing hard. "Maybe I will." Across the room, Diane toyed with her bracelet thoughtfully. "Funny," she murmured. "Tonight started as just another dinner party. But I think it's going to end up being something we remember for a long time." Ruth smiled, her heart warm. "Sometimes, the most unexpected nights are the ones that change us." Caroline clinked her glass gently against Ruth's. "Here's to unexpected nights, and the women brave enough to live them authentically." The women raised their glasses together, no longer out of obligation or competition, but out of genuine respect. And for the first time all evening, Ruth felt truly seen, not for the number in her bank account, but for the quiet strength she'd carried all along. As the evening wound down, the once perfected mask of high society had slipped, revealing something more raw, more human underneath. Ruth stood quietly by the window, looking out into the moonlit garden beyond. The trimmed hedges and ornate fountains shimmered under soft lights. But tonight, they seemed less impressive than before. Carolyn joined her, two steaming cups of coffee in hand. "I've never seen Victoria so reflective," she mused, handing Ruth a cup. "You really shook something loose in her." Ruth sipped, letting the warmth spread through her chest. Maybe she's always known. Just needed a mirror." Carolyn tilted her head, studying Ruth with affection. "You've always been that mirror. You know, even in college. You never played their games." "I never fit their mold," Ruth replied with a gentle smile. "And I stopped trying a long time ago." Behind them, Victoria approached cautiously. No longer the sharp, dominant hostess from earlier, but a woman searching for footing. "Ruth," she began hesitantly, "could I talk to you privately?" Carolyn gave Ruth an encouraging nod and stepped away. "Oh, could sister Ruth turned. "Of course." Victoria folded her arms, her gaze flickering down before meeting Ruth's eyes. "I owe you an apology. Not just for tonight, but for every time I've judged a woman like you." Ruth stayed silent, letting her speak. "I see it now the way we measure people. The boxes we put them in." Victoria exhaled shakily. "But you stepped outside every box I thought I understood." "It's easy to judge what we don't understand," Ruth said softly. "I've been guilty of it too, in different ways." Victoria looked surprised. You're so grounded." "I've had my moments," Ruth admitted. "But life taught me judgment builds walls. Curiosity builds bridges." Victoria swallowed, her voice quiet. "Do you think it too late for me to build those bridges?" Ruth reached out, resting a hand on Victoria's arm. "It's never too late to start. And it doesn't need to be big gestures. Sometimes, it's as simple as listening, really listening." For a moment, Victoria's hard exterior cracked, revealing something vulnerable. She nodded, blinking back moisture in her eyes. "Thank you." "Thank you for being willing to see," Ruth replied. As Victoria stepped away, Ruth turned back to the window, watching as a breeze rippled through the garden. A peace settled over her. Tonight had started as just another social gathering, a room full of assumptions and silent hierarchies. But it had ended differently. Behind her, the other women were gathered around Caroline, laughing more softly now, their conversation warmer, stripped of pretense. The sharp edges had dulled. Something had shifted. Caroline came back to Ruth's side. I meant what I said earlier. You're changing things, Ruth. Even if they don't say it out loud. I'm not here to change them, Ruth said thoughtfully. I just showed up as myself. Sometimes that's enough. Caroline linked arms with her. And sometimes that's exactly what the world needs. A faint buzz came from Ruth's phone. She glanced down at the notification, a message from her investment team confirming another successful acquisition. Another milestone. Another number. But tonight, it didn't feel like the most important victory. She tucked the phone away, sipping her coffee again as they both looked out at the quiet night. You know, Caroline said, the Ruth I knew back in college, she always dreamed of changing the world through design. Ruth smiled softly. I still do. Just one table, one conversation, one person at a time. Caroline squeezed her arm. Promise me something. Anything. Don't ever stop showing up exactly as you are. Ruth's smile deepened. I couldn't, even if I tried. And as the clock chimed midnight, Ruth Harper stood tall in the simple gray sweater that had been dismissed hours ago, now seen with new eyes, not as a statement of lack, but as a quiet emblem of substance. For in a world obsessed with spectacle, sometimes the quietest power was simply being unapologetically true. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows of Ruth's townhouse, illuminating shelves lined with books, sketches, and small prototypes of furniture designs. Ruth sat at her kitchen table, a steaming mug in hand, reviewing a letter. It wasn't business, this was something deeper. Across from her sat Caroline, still glowing from the warmth of last night's conversations. So, what's next for you? Caroline asked, sipping her own coffee. Ruth set the letter down thoughtfully. You know, for a long time, I thought building a business was the pinnacle. That success was scaling, selling, securing wealth. And now Caroline probed gently. Ruth leaned back, gaze drifting to a photograph on the wall, her younger self, hands covered in sawdust, standing beside her first handmade table. Now, I think success is planting seeds, mentoring the next generation, creating space for people who've been overlooked. Caroline smiled. The foundation. Ruth nodded. The first round of scholarship recipients will be announced next month. Kids from rural towns, single moms, refugees, people with talent but no access. That's incredible. Ruth. Caroline's voice brimmed with admiration. It's necessary, Ruth said quietly. I spent too many years being underestimated because of what I wore, where I lived, or how quietly I worked. If I can spare someone else that burden, even a little, it's worth it. Her phone buzzed again, a text from Victoria. Morning, Ruth. If you're open to it, I'd love to tour your workshop sometime. I have a lot to learn. Ruth chuckled softly. Would you believe Victoria wants to visit my studio? Caroline raised an eyebrow, amused. Now that's a plot twist. She's trying, Ruth said with quiet grace. And that's more than I expected. A knock sounded at the door. Ruth stood, opening it to find a young woman holding a small package. Mrs. T. Harper delivery for you. Thank you. Ruth accepted it, signed, and brought it inside. Caroline watched as Ruth unwrapped the parcel. Inside was a hand-carved wooden box, and atop it, a note. For the woman who inspired me to believe in craftsmanship again, Liam. Ruth smiled, tracing her fingers over the intricate grain. Liam had been one of the first apprentices she'd mentored, once a troubled teen, now an artisan with his own thriving studio. It's funny, Ruth mused. For all the noise about money and prestige, this, right here, feels richer than any bank statement. Caroline reached over, squeezing her hand. That's because it is. Outside, the city hummed awake, cars streaming down streets, shops unlocking their doors, people rushing to appointments. But inside Ruth's home, time moved more slowly, anchored by purpose. As she placed the wooden box beside her other cherished pieces, Ruth thought back to the dinner party. The dismissive glances, the quiet ridicule, the shocked faces when they learned the truth. But more than that, she thought of the young server whose mother saved 3 years for a coffee table, of Victoria's hesitant steps toward humility, of the students who would soon walk paths Ruth had once dreamed of. Legacy wasn't in the headlines, she realized. It wasn't in the zeros of a bank balance or the applause of a room once hostile. Legacy was in the quiet ripples we left behind, inspired hands, opened doors, shifted perspectives. She looked at Caroline, a familiar warmth filling her chest. "Promise me something," Ruth said. "Anything," Caroline replied. "When people try to put you in a box, break the damn box." Caroline laughed. "Deal." And as Ruth gazed out the window, watching sunlight dance across rooftops, she felt it, the quiet satisfaction of a life lived on her own terms. A life that proved wealth wasn't about what you own, but what you build. In a world obsessed with appearances, never underestimate the power of quiet strength. If Ruth's story moved you, share it. Subscribe for more tales of hidden brilliance, and tell us who's the quiet hero in your life. Never mistake quiet for weak. Never mistake simple for small. Because sometime, the most unassuming person in the room, it is the one who changes everything. Subscribe now for more stories of hidden power. Drop a comment. Who's your quiet hero? And remember, greatness doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers.